Whispers of the night, tales spun from fear, the name that echoes through centuries, forever etched in the annals of both history and horror. But who was the man behind the monster? Did a simple prince, a warrior of a forgotten age, truly possess the power to transcend mortality, to command the shadows and feast upon the living? We stand at the precipice of legend, a chasm carved between the brutal reality of a medieval battlefield and the chilling phantom that haunts our nightmares. This is the question that ignites our investigation. How did Vlad III, the feared prince of Wallachia, a man whose name struck terror into the hearts of his enemies, become the immortal, blood-drinking Count Dracula? Our journey begins not in a Gothic castle bathed in moonlight, but in the rugged, unforgiving lands of Wallachia, a small principality caught between powerful empires, perpetually fighting for its very survival. Here, in the 15th century, ruled Vlad III, often known as Vlad Dracul, son of Vlad Dracul. His father, a knight of the Order of the Dragon, bestowed upon him a legacy of defiance against the encroaching Ottoman Turks. Young Vlad witnessed firsthand the brutal realities of power and betrayal. Captured by the Ottomans as a boy, he spent years in their courts, a hostage but also a student. He learned their tactics, their language, and perhaps a deeper, more chilling understanding of power itself. He returned to Wallachia not as a boy, but as a man forged in the crucible of adversity, a prince determined to reclaim his throne and defend his homeland with an unyielding ferocity. His childhood experiences, marked by political intrigue and the precariousness of his family's position, instilled in him a profound sense of self-reliance and an almost obsessive need for control. This formative period, steeped in the machinations of the Ottoman court and the volatile politics of Wallachia, shaped the formidable ruler he would become, a leader who understood that survival often demanded a ruthlessness that transcended conventional morality. He learned that in a world where loyalty was a commodity and betrayal a constant threat, projecting an image of absolute, unwavering strength was paramount to maintaining authority and securing his kingdom's precarious existence. The lessons of survival, learned in the unforgiving crucible of Ottoman captivity, were indelibly etched into his strategic thinking and his approach to governance. He was a prince who understood the value of fear as a tool, a lesson undoubtedly honed during those formative years where the slightest misstep could have dire consequences. This early exposure to the brutal necessities of power laid the groundwork for the formidable and often terrifying ruler he would become. His education was not confined to books and treaties. It was a visceral schooling in the art of dominance and the stark realities of political survival. And ferocity he had in abundance. Vlad III earned a reputation that preceded him like a plague. He was a master strategist, a brilliant military leader who repeatedly repelled the mighty Ottoman Empire, a feat that earned him the admiration and perhaps the fear of all Europe. His methods, however, were as legendary as his victories. His name is inextricably linked to a particularly gruesome form of execution, impalement. The sight of stakes driven through the bodies of his enemies, lining the roads leading to his capital, was a deliberate and terrifying spectacle. It was a message, a stark warning to any who dared to threaten his realm. His cruelty was not indiscriminate. It was a calculated instrument of terror, designed to break the will of his adversaries before they even engaged in battle.
The forests surrounding his fortresses were said to be dotted with the impaled, a grim and silent testament to his absolute authority. Travelers approaching his domain were forced to confront this macabre display, a psychological warfare tactic that proved devastatingly effective. This meticulous and public application of extreme punishment served a dual purpose: to deter external threats and to enforce absolute obedience within his own borders. Stories circulated widely, tales of peasants being impaled for minor infractions, of merchants for cheating, and of political rivals for even the hint of disloyalty. The sheer scale and theatricality of these executions left an indelible mark on the collective memory of the region, paving the way for a legend that would far outlast his mortal reign. His reputation was so formidable that it is said that when a Turkish ambassador, accustomed to the deference shown to the Sultan, refused to remove his turban in Vlad's presence, Vlad personally hammered the turban onto the ambassador's head, ensuring it would never be removed without tearing flesh. Such acts, whether strictly factual or embellished, contributed to the chilling aura of the Impaler. His reign was a harsh reality, a period where survival often meant embracing a cruelty that would echo through the ages. The deliberate construction of these terrifying tableaus was a testament to his keen understanding of human psychology and the pervasive power of fear. He was not merely punishing, he was crafting a legend of terror, a formidable reputation that served as a shield for his besieged principality. The sheer scale and theatricality of these executions left an indelible mark on the collective memory of the region, paving the way for a legend that would far outlast his mortal reign. But history, as we know it, is often incomplete, a tapestry woven with threads of fact and embellished with the fantastical. Over the centuries, the tales of Vlad the Impaler, the stern defender of Wallachia, began to mutate. They seeped into the folklore of Eastern Europe, whispered around campfires, evolving with each retelling. The sharp edge of historical truth gradually softened, replaced with something more ethereal, more sinister. The seeds of the myth were sown in these very exaggerations, in the fear that Vlad III had so masterfully cultivated. His reputation for ruthlessness, his prolonged periods of absence from his court as he waged war, the very darkness that surrounded his reign, these elements provided fertile ground for the imagination. The oral traditions passed down through generations often amplified the most terrifying aspects of his rule, transforming the practical application of brutal justice into something almost supernatural. The folklore surrounding Vlad became a cultural repository for anxieties about power, corruption, and the unknown forces that governed their harsh lives. The meticulous planning behind his infamous forests of the impaled speaks volumes about his understanding of psychological warfare. He didn't just punish, he terrified, aiming to break the spirit of his enemies before a single sword was drawn. This calculated use of horror as a political tool, while undeniably effective in its time, would later serve as a powerful, albeit unintended, foundation for a far more enduring and supernatural terror. The sheer audacity of his punishments, the systematic nature of their public display, painted him as a figure operating beyond the normal bounds of human behavior, a perception that would be readily seized upon by later storytellers.
The impact of these grim spectacles was profound. They created an almost palpable atmosphere of dread, a collective unconscious that was primed to accept even the most outlandish tales about the man responsible. The stories of his personal involvement in his punishments, of his willingness to dine amidst the impaled, further cemented his image as a ruler who was not only cruel but also disturbingly detached from the suffering he inflicted. This perceived detachment, this seeming ability to operate beyond the normal spectrum of human empathy, was a key ingredient in the burgeoning legend. The very pragmatism of his brutality, when viewed through the lens of subsequent generations, began to acquire a supernatural sheen. It was this potent combination of historical fact and evolving folklore that began the alchemy, the slow transmutation of a warrior prince into an immortal creature of the night. Stoker, researching Eastern European folklore and the history of Wallachia, stumbled upon the legend of Vlad III. He found a name, Dracula, that resonated with a primal fear, a name that connected the historical figure to ancient Slavic myths of demons and devils. The Dracula moniker itself, derived from his father's membership in the Order of the Dragon, meant son of the dragon. But to Stoker, it also evoked something far more terrifying, something that conjured images of blood, of darkness, of an eternal hunger. The name itself held a potent allure, a linguistic echo of ancient evils that resonated deeply with the Victorian fascination for the occult and the exotic. Stoker was not merely recounting history, he was weaving a tapestry of fear and fascination, drawing inspiration from a world far removed from his own, a world he perceived through the lens of romanticism and Gothic sensibility. He was captivated by the exoticism and perceived barbarity of the East, a common trope in Victorian literature, and Vlad III, with his grim reputation, fit perfectly into this narrative mold. Stoker's fascination wasn't solely with the historical Vlad, but with the romanticized, the alien, the dangerous other that Eastern Europe represented to the Victorian imagination. He sought out accounts, even those of questionable veracity, that painted a picture of a terrifying ruler, a figure who embodied the dark side of a land perceived as wild and untamed. This selective focus on the most sensational aspects of Vlad's reign, coupled with his imaginative leaps, created a character that was both rooted in history and entirely of his own making. He was drawn to the dramatic narratives, the chilling anecdotes that painted Vlad as a figure of immense power and dark intent. Stoker's genius lay in his ability to synthesize these disparate elements: the historical accounts of a brutal prince, the widespread superstitions about the undead, and the inherent anxieties of his own Victorian era, into a cohesive and utterly terrifying narrative. He took the raw materials of history and forged them into something entirely new, a myth that would eclipse the man it was based upon, demonstrating the profound power of fiction to shape our perception of reality.
The subtle nuances of Vlad's political struggles were rendered irrelevant, replaced by the potent allure of an immortal predator. Consider the contrast. The prince who fought for his nation's sovereignty, a fiercely patriotic leader, was transmuted into a creature who preyed upon the very humanity he once purportedly defended. This narrative sleight of hand is a testament to how a compelling story can overshadow historical accuracy, and how a well-placed villain can capture the global imagination far more effectively than a complex political figure. The very act of storytelling, then, becomes a form of power, capable of shaping public consciousness across centuries. The story of Vlad Dracula, the historical figure, was absorbed and transmuted by Stoker's pen into something altogether different, a being that fed not on political enemies, but on the lifeblood of innocence. This transformation speaks to a fundamental human fascination with the macabre, a desire to explore the boundaries of fear and mortality through narrative. It also speaks to the enduring power of the written word, capable of resurrecting and reinventing the past for an ever-hungry public. But how did a pragmatic, albeit brutal, medieval ruler become a creature that defied all natural laws? What specific threads of his life, his legend, were picked up and twisted to create the immortal Count? Was it merely the sensationalism of the printed word? Or were there deeper resonances within Vlad's own story that lent themselves so perfectly to the vampire mythos? These are the questions that lie at the heart of our quest, the enigma we aim to unravel.
The historical Vlad III, the Impaler, and the mythical Dracula, the Count of Darkness, are two sides of the same coin, inextricably linked, yet vastly different. The stark contrast between the battlefield pragmatism of the prince and the supernatural malevolence of the count highlights the transformative power of storytelling. Did the historical figure's capacity for extreme violence inadvertently lay the groundwork for his mythological immortality? It's a question that forces us to confront the nature of fear itself and how it can be weaponized, amplified, and ultimately immortalized. The sheer intensity of Vlad's historical cruelty, the scale of his macabre displays, undoubtedly fueled the whispers that painted him as something more than human. Imagine standing before a forest of the impaled, a macabre testament to his power and his ruthlessness. Such sights would have been difficult to reconcile with mere mortal ambition. They would have inspired awe, certainly, but also a deep primal fear that transcended rational explanation. This visceral terror, embedded in the very fabric of his reign, became the fertile soil from which the vampire legend would sprout and flourish, proving that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are born not from supernatural origins, but from the darkest depths of human history. The psychological impact of such widespread and horrific punishments created an atmosphere of pervasive dread, a psychological landscape perfectly suited for the emergence of a supernatural entity embodying ultimate terror. It's a fascinating paradox. The more Vlad sought to establish earthly control through fear, the more he inadvertently invited the creation of a being that transcended earthly limitations. Consider the power of a single, terrifying image. The image of Vlad the Impaler, his reign defined by a chilling practicality, a warrior prince who used fear as his ultimate weapon. Now, juxtapose that with the enduring image of Dracula, a creature of eternal night, a predator of souls.
The transformation is not simply from man to monster, but from history to myth, a testament to the enduring power of storytelling and the human fascination with the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of the known. This profound metamorphosis begs the question, what does this dual nature tell us about our own fears, our own desires to confront the terrifying and the unknown? What does it say about our collective need for potent, archetypal villains that embody our deepest anxieties? If the shadows of history intrigue you as much as they do us, make sure you subscribe to Legend or History so you don't miss our next dive into the real stories behind the world's most enduring myths. The journey from the blood-soaked fields of Wallachia to the shadowy corridors of Gothic literature is a remarkable testament to the enduring power of human narrative. Vlad III, the historical figure, a prince who defended his land with a ferocity bordering on the inhuman, became the very blueprint for Count Dracula, the immortal fiend. His reputation for cruelty, particularly his signature method of impalement, served as the grim foundation upon which Bram Stoker, centuries later, would build his iconic literary vampire. The political climate of Eastern Europe, a constant battleground for empires, lent an air of perpetual danger and intrigue to the region, further fueling the folklore that would eventually ensconce Vlad in the realm of the supernatural. The historical reality of a prince struggling for survival in a turbulent geopolitical landscape provided the fertile ground for the subsequent flowering of myth. The very desperation of Wallachia's position, caught between the expanding Ottoman Empire and the Hungarian kingdom, forced its rulers into extreme measures. Vlad III, inheriting a legacy of defiance and survival, embraced a ruthlessness that, while historically documented, also lent itself to the darker interpretations that would follow. He wasn't merely a ruler, he was a symbol of resistance, a bulwark against overwhelming odds, and this larger-than-life role naturally attracted the embellishments of legend. Early printed accounts, often sensationalized and exaggerated, played a crucial role in the initial dissemination of Vlad's terrifying image. These pamphlets and chronicles, circulating throughout Europe, painted him as a bloodthirsty tyrant, a devil incarnate, effectively creating a form of posthumous marketing that sensationalized his every deed. They were the tabloids of their day, feeding a public appetite for the sensational and the monstrous. Over time, these accounts were further embellished by subsequent writers and artists, each layer of interpretation adding to the mystique and horror. The core of Vlad's historical persona, his unyielding will, his strategic brilliance, and his undeniable ruthlessness, was twisted and amplified, morphing into the supernatural abilities and immortality of the vampire. It's a fascinating symbiotic relationship between history and fiction, where the truth of a brutal reign became the fuel for an enduring myth. The transformation is not simply about bloodlust, it's about power, control, and the primal fear of the predator. Vlad's historical actions provided the raw material, the chilling anecdotes that were then creatively reimagined by Stoker and others to craft a figure that transcended historical context and tapped into universal human anxieties about mortality and the unknown. This process of mythologization is a potent reminder that our perception of the past is often shaped less by objective fact and more by the stories that resonate most powerfully with our deepest fears and fascinations. The sheer terror Vlad inspired was so potent, so pervasive, that it was almost inevitable that it would be amplified and reimagined by a culture eager for tales of the uncanny and the monstrous. The legacy of the Impaler, already steeped in fear, was ripe for transformation into an eternal being of the night.
The transformation of Vlad III into Dracula is a powerful illustration of how history can be mythologized, how the complexities of a human life can be simplified and sensationalized into enduring archetypes. It compels us to consider the blurred lines between factual accounts and the stories we tell ourselves, the legends that shape our understanding of the past and our fears of the present. It raises the fascinating question, how many other historical figures have been similarly transformed, their true legacies obscured by the captivating power of myth and imagination? What other historical figures, through the lens of legend, have become something far greater or far more monstrous than their earthly lives might suggest? The enduring power of the Dracula myth lies not just in its inherent terror, but in its ability to serve as a mirror, reflecting our own fascination with the dark and the eternal. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Which historical figure do you believe has a similarly fascinating legend that deserves to be explored? Hit the like button if the transmogrification of history into myth captivates you, and ensure you're subscribed to Legend or History to uncover more of these captivating transformations. The story of Vlad III, the Impaler, and his descent into the realm of myth as Dracula is a profound reminder that sometimes the most terrifying truths are found not in dusty archives, but in the stories we choose to tell ourselves. Stories that can grant a form of immortality far beyond the reach of any earthly kingdom.